Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our Industry Next event today, brought to you by Entitle. My name is Aaron Arnold. I'm a customer success manager over here. Today, we're going to be walking through the size of the prize, calculating B2B aftermarket parts for opportunity for your fiscal year 2023 planning. So from the Entitle side, to kick things off, I'm going to introduce Tom Sturdivant. Tom is our global leader of customer success, and he's responsible for some of the larger verticals of customers that we work with, ranging from food and packaging, pumps, machining, and processing. And Tom has a technological background and it's currently working with optimizing the usage of sales and service solutions for our customers. So Tom, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Can we flip to the next slide? All right, so I want to take a moment to set up the context as to why is now the time to focus on aftermarket. So broader macroeconomics affecting OEM's customer base is really driving them to evaluate their budgetary spending to squeeze more out of what they currently have, which they're in the process of doing now. There's key factors affecting decision-making being made are supply chain issues, 40-year high inflation, coupled with the rising interest rates and broader geopolitical turmoil. These forces are causing OEMs customer base to reevaluate new equipment purchases and focus on maintaining and running existing equipment longer than previously planned. Subsequently, this shift reduces new equipment sales and will increase the overall opportunity for aftermarket parts and service. In order to capture this, companies need to be ready. The first step to being ready is to have an estimate to what demand could look like, which becomes a starting point for the process to understand the people, processes, technology, and prioritization to capture the opportunity from this shift. For those who are trying to grow their aftermarket share, they need to be positioned to really take advantage of this shift. Aaron, if you can flip to the next slide. So as mentioned, now is the time OEM's customers are reviewing their budgets for the next year, which for the OEM presents an opportunity to grow their aftermarket sales and services business. To understand how you should go after it, what you need, and how much such an initiative should be prioritized, you'll need to first understand what the install base will need from a parts and services perspective, and that will help you understand the future parts demand, which our guest speaker Ron will be sharing today. This will help you develop a plan to hopefully allow you to better be positioned to take advantage of this shift. So Aaron, if you can flip to the next slide. And with that, I'd like to introduce Ron. Ron has been focused on aftermarket for 40 years. He has run parts P&L for equipment manufacturers. He has been an advisor for industrial B2B OEMs and has been a technology thought leader and partner. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ron.
Hey, thanks a lot, Tom. Today, we're going to spend some time on trying to be a little bit more thorough in forecasting revenues for aftermarket. We're going to first start off with actually forecasting of the revenue. Then what's important is measuring its profitability. As we all know, aftermarket profitability is usually 2 to 3, profit margins are 2 to 3-fold higher than that of product sales. Then we're going to talk about a little about ROI, which a lot of people don't talk about in the parts area, but it is indeed important. And one of the reasons it is because the turnover rate of parts is so low typically that that's why the profit margins have to be so high, because we have such a large investment in parts. And then we're going to talk about some of the effectiveness of managing the parts business unit, and that actually impacts a lot of your indirect costs that are related to the parts business unit. Okay, next. Okay, let's first start off. There are 2 different ways to forecast revenue for aftermarket parts. One is looking at your independent demand forecasting. All of you have some kind of forecaster, which is based upon statistical analysis It could be average, it could be seasonal. I mean, there's a zillion different ways to forecast parts demand. So the first way to do it, to project your revenue for 2023, is to take every single part number, take its forecast, multiply by price, and then look at what your aggregate discounts are. Now, here's a really interesting thing. Very few people do this, but your forecast should be pretty close. In other words, your current forecast should be pretty close to what your actual revenues are. I don't know how many of you do that, but you should do that on a continuous basis, because if that's not, for example, if you're going to look at what your, let's say, January, just your January forecast, take a look at what your forecasted demand is statistically on January, multiply it by the price minus the aggregate discounts. That should be pretty close to what you're running now. If it's not, you have a forecasting problem. All right. A lot of forecasts are way off. I mean, when you're forecasting tens of thousands of part numbers, and I've had clients 100,000 or more. All right. You have a lot of static in demand. I mean, you have a lot of items that, you know, have one hit a year or 2 hits a year at most. So how do you forecast something like that? Yeah, and people spend a lot of time on statistical forecasting, but you know, it's like polishing turds. All right, a lot of that stuff, there's probably a handful of items that you can have some kind of statistical relevancy in regards to forecasting part number and quantity. So the first thing to do is, and that should be your normal exercise. Matter of fact, you should do that every single month. All right, take your statistical forecast outputs times your unit price minus discount. And again, your price for 2023 will include not only what it currently is and what you plan to, how you plan to increase prices. This gets interesting because some companies just do across the board 3% price increase, whatever it may be. All right, but that's a fool's errand. I mean, you really have to segment price increases by a bunch of different segments. You might want to decrease some items. You might want to increase items by 30%. You know, again, 20 to 30% of all your prices, you have items that are underpriced in your catalog. All right. Why don't you hear about that? Because customers never bitch about low prices. All right. They only complain about high prices. So there's a lot of opportunities there. So your revenue projections for 2023 includes your forecasted demand, as well as your price increase, net price. You have to really do a pro forma income statement to do that, and it should be on a continuous basis. You should do this every single month so that you're monitoring what's happening with your whole forecasting system. A forecasting system where you're just looking at part number quantity is really not valid. Then you have other issues. For example, limited warranty. All right, what percentage of your forecasted demand included limited warranty and may or may not include limited warranty in 2023? You have to do that. This gets involved with how many new machines were delivered during a short period of time. And then you even get more complex. Some of you have a lot of parts that are installed in exchange programs, swaps. This is one area that you will be totally screwed up if you have different part numbers. You basically allocate different part numbers for different conditions. A lot of people who have swaps treat it as inventory. So they ship it out. It's the cost of the inventory, whatever that is on your balance sheet. And then it's returned at zero value, and then you repair it and you take the repair and included that into the inventory value. So if you had an item that was $1,000, you ship it out, comes back, it costs $250 to repair it. All of a sudden that item has a $250 inventory value. Well, that's absolutely wrong. Okay, only if financial accountants love that. But that will really mess up, depending on the materiality, what percentage of the items that you transact in your parts area are actually swaps or like-kind exchanges. Again, those are typically LRUs, FRUs. This gets involved also with warranty, but you got to really be careful. This is an exercise that you should be doing all year long. There's a lot of questions. Exchange items or reparable items are really fixed assets. They should never be treated as inventory. They're fixed assets. The part numbers should be always the same. You shouldn't change part numbers. You should change condition, but not part number. That gets involved with it. Again, it depends on what percentage. Yeah, when I was running business unit, I had 25, 30% of my overall revenue were basically exchange transactions or swaps. So I had to, there was a lot of issues I had to deal with in regards to forecasting, and then forecasting gets really ugly there because it mixes different condition codes all under the same part number, or sometimes you have different part numbers. But anyway, this is the first thing. Almost every one of you have a forecaster, everyone you have a price list, and it's just a simple extension. This is the easy stuff. And yet you might find a lot of issues here that conflict with what your real world is. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, Ron, we actually had a question come in. I think it's a great time based off what you were just speaking about. So we base our forecast off of historical sales because we might have a purchase of an item once a year or twice a year. So statistical forecasting doesn't really work. That being the case, is there a value to look at forecast accuracy?
Yeah, forecast. First of all, you have to segment your parts into, probably not Pareto. It's more like 95. You got probably about 5 to 10% of your part numbers generate, 85% of your revenue, right? So a lot of those onesies, all right, so if you have an average forecaster on a monthly basis, so if you sell, 1 unit a year, you have, 0.08 of forecast, all right? But you can use that. That's fine for the whole, that works fine for the whole year, but on a month-by-month basis, it's irrelevant. So again, on the aggregate level, it works okay. And I know what that is. I've had, for a lot of you, especially items that are out of production, all right, machines that are out of production, you're going to have a weird demand pattern. Statistically, I mean, it's easy to do average demand, but average demand, has its limits also. I mean, you can drown in a lake that has an average depth of 3 inches, right? So averages are not good. You really have to have different forecasters for different segments of your business. I break it down into, different machine models and what their children are, and look at the install base. It gets, I don't have a simple answer for you, but on the aggregate annual point, if you're using monthly average of 0.08, all right, that's fine. All right, that's what I've used. Again, this is for budgeting purposes. All right, that's what this is. This is not the actual statistics. So average works okay, and you can have weighted. I mean, you can have a weighted average depending on any kind of growth that you may see. For example, when you first introduce a new model, you might have one hit. Okay, it's a brand new product. You really have no idea what the demand is, and then as the install base increases, that one, and I've done this many times, where I put a weight on because I know that demand will pick up based upon the install base. So if I know that particular child is the parent install base is increasing dramatically because it's a new model, you're moving forward, I would double, triple the weight based upon the install base. You know, this gets, I mean, I can spend hours talking about statistical forecasting and the pluses and minuses. But in the aggregate, again, what you should look at is what your forecaster is generating on the aggregate times the price minus the discount and excluding because your forecaster doesn't identify if it's a warranty item or not, which is not a revenue. So you have to exclude that. Again, what you can do on the warranty side to make it simpler on the aggregate, you can find out what your accruals are for your limited warranty, and you can also look what your actual expenditures are for the warranty and deduct those from your aggregate forecast. But I would do some simulations experiment, but it ultimately ends up into a pro forma income statement on the income, and then ultimately on the profitability, because if you're accessing price, that could be out of your price file, but then out of your balance sheet, what your standard cost is what your that revenue minus standard cost is obviously what your profitability is. But I would be also very careful for those of you who get involved with swaps and exchanges. Okay. Again, you really have to, you really have to segment and understand what your install base is in regards to statistical forecasting. Everyone, it's almost worthless. Statistical forecasting is almost worthless for a new model introduction. Some statistic forecasting packages enable you to do like kind forecast. So this model is like another model. So we're going to replicate the demand patterns for wear use for those part numbers. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. But when you really look at in regards to parts, it's not even Pareto's law of 80-20. It's more like, 85-10. Okay, so you got 10% of the items generate about 85% of your aggregate demand. So anyway, that's the first one I would look at. I call that easy. All right, next. Okay, now the sexy part is, here's a dilemma. Your statistical forecasting, using statistics in regards to what your actual part numbers demand on, is there's nothing in there that tells you what your market share is. Nothing. All it does is say, this is what we've been selling, but you have no idea what your market share is, what the size of the market is, and what your share of that market is. Well, now whatever your sales are, in effect, become the share of the market. So I had a extended conversation with CEO. All right, he goes, hey, Ron, our part sales increased 10% last year. I said, Dave, given the market size, your market grew 15% last year. So you're happy to lose market share, which is what would happen, right? If your market grows 15% and you're growing and your growth is only 10%, that means you lost market share. So market share, this is the real challenge. How do you figure out what your market share is? Well, the first thing is, most of you probably know what the lifespan of your machines are, all right? Depends on the segments, but you could segment it. You also, all of you, know by serial number what you manufactured over the last whatever years. So if you're a market, if your product has a typical economic life of, let's say, 10 years, you can go back to all your warranty, all your serial numbers that you shipped in the last year. You come up with what the average value of those machines were, and you define what the installed base is. So these are all the serial numbers we shipped in the last 10 years. This is what their value is, and there's a direct correlation. It's very high R squared. It's probably 0.7, 0.75 between the value of what your install base is and how much is spent on an annual basis to manage the maintenance and the productivity of your install base. There's, again, with parts, I always divide parts into two segments when we're doing market sizing. One is for maintaining the machine, and the next one is consumables. They're two separate drivers. Statistically, they're totally detached. All right. So we're going to talk about only on the maintenance side to manage the availability of the machines, which is basically its frequency of downtime times its duration is the availability machine. So what you have to do is, again, and I've done this, a lot of grunt, but almost all of you have a record of what was sold over the last 10 years by serial numbers. Some of you sell directly to customers, end users, others sell to distributors, but it's irrelevant. As long as you know what the average life is or estimated life, you're not going to be perfect on that. You can now know what size your install base is, and approximately a rule of thumb is somewhere between 2 and 4% of the current replacement value of the installed base is spent on maintaining it on an annual basis. There are some exceptions, but that's a start. So you can, for example, if your current parts sales are, let's say, $50 million a year, and you have the install base of, let's say, 1 billion, you have an install base of $2 billion bucks, okay, at 3%, that's about $60 million a year, all right? And you're running at 50 million. So it would say that you have a pretty decent market share. But let's say the install base is $2 billion and your sales are only $20 million. Well, you have a problem there, right? So this is big picture stuff, but enables you to see if you have a decent market share. So you know what your actual sales are, so you know what your market share is. And if you know it's way below, it doesn't seem to be within the ballpark, relative order of magnitude, or ROM it's called, then you have to start thinking about, where am I losing market share? Okay, and so you have to create, and so this provides an opportunity to create initiatives to increase your market share. And then you can also have different programs to increase the size of the market with initiatives that you may have. This is really strategic, but here's the dilemma. Usually this is a rush exercise at the end of the year, forecasting. You know, CFO or your boss, whoever that may be, is saying, I need a forecast. And you're going, well, we're going to grow 3% next year, which is what most people do, right? But it has no relevancy to what the relative to the install base. All you know is that I'll throw in 3%. I have no idea, all right? Why this is important now is because as people tighten up some of their CapEx, all right, there might be a cyclical decline in the demand for new machines. It may or may not happen. And when that occurs, aftermarket becomes the profit driver for an OEM. So this becomes very important. And if you can provide your leadership with indication that you're proactive in this area, and especially understanding what market share is, market size is, it really makes a big difference. I can't tell you how often I've been in meetings with leadership, and we have the business, the aftermarket business unit lead come in. and they're really not prepared on a financial point of view. They come off and they're marginalized in most cases. This gives you the tools to think this through and also be able to simulate. This gets involved with simulation. You can, again, find out how much is spent to maintain your machines by looking at what your accruals are on your warranty. That gives you at least a ballpark. Is it 2, 3, 4% of the value of your machines? So anyway, so we have looking at forecasted using statistics, and that's one way. This is another way. You really have to combine the two to start looking at market size, market share. All right, this gets involved with current replacement value, and the current replacement value is what those machines cost today, because that takes into consideration inflation factors. And Tom talked about inflation, just to make you guys feel like inflation is really nothing. When I entered the workforce, inflation was running at 18 to 20%. And to manage, and then not only did we have issues there, but then I had currency fluctuations. I was bringing parts in from Europe into the United States. We had, it was challenging to say the least. What you have now is nothing, okay, relative to what it was, 40 years ago. And just for your own information, my first home, I had a mortgage of 19%. So people bitch, my son bitches about a 7% mortgage rate. I go, big whoop. Okay, next. Okay, again, there are a lot of PM, in other words, some of you have kits that are tied in with certain PM tasks for your install base. And what happens is, again, you have to look at your deliveries and how they spike. Again, some of you have pretty steady demand for your particular products. Others have new product introduction that have all kind of issues. I mean, when you have a new product that's introduced, it's usually a mess. I mean, you have reliability problems and then you have modifications that have to incur. It really messes up your demand power. Just for your own instance, just give you an example. Running aerospace aftermarket parts business globally, I had one of our aircraft. One of our aircraft was a huge amount were delivered within a very short period of time, and I had this huge bubble coming through for a major overhaul of the landing gears, and it was really a real challenge, because I had to get all the parts in, and we had a big bubble coming through in regards to aftermarket parts. The dilemma was that my supplier went bankrupt, and so I had all this revenue planned for the next fiscal year, and all of a sudden I had nothing. I couldn't get one part. All the parts had been given to the production line rather than the parts organization. But that's a sad story that I can talk about another time. Okay, next. Okay, so when you look at the profitability, again, you have your revenue, you have your cost of sales, gives you your gross profit. But then there's a lot of standard cost variances that actually gets involved in the parts market. But that's not usually reflected. It may be reflected on your P&L, but in the aggregate level, not on the individual level. Then you have depreciation of parts. You have all your supply chain management costs. Some of you include that in your standard cost, others do not, all right? There's also impairment reserves, write-offs, there's enterprise G&A. You actually end up with the net profit. Typically in aftermarket, after you take all these costs down, you're running somewhere between 15, I'd say 15 to 18% when you take all these, the net profit as a percentage of revenue, rather than products are usually 6 to 8%. All right, so we're talking about some material difference. Again, every one of you are different. Some of you get hit with big general administrative costs, but the standard cost, here's one of the dilemmas now when you plan for 2023 with some inflation. In the past, we've had, practically no inflation, but now if we're running 8 to 10% inflation, how do you, when do you modify your prices to reflect that? And do you have to reflect it for everything? You may or may not, depending on the policy. My recommendation is that you really have to segment everything and look at different margins out there for each of these groups. And you may even decrease prices. I'll tell you an interesting story. And when you're forecasting, a lot of people, especially items that people think that are overpriced, you can decrease those. You just increase other items that you've had no complaints about. You end up with the same pro forma income statement, the same profitability. But you have to work, profitability now becomes much more important for a lot of OEMs. When cycles are down, the parts business can generate the vast majority of definitely the majority, and in certain cases, 100% of the profitability of organizations. But you have to tell your story about, it's all about profit. Revenue is irrelevant. It's all about profit and what kind of impact you can have on the enterprise, the overall OEM enterprise in regards to profitability. And you should be proud of yourselves to go in front of your leadership, your OEM enterprise leadership, and tell the story of not only what your actual forecast will be for 2023, but how you're going to also enhance it, and understanding market share, what your market size is and what your market share is, and what opportunities there are, out there. Again, every organization's a little different, and some people they increase their sales by grabbing market share from their competitors. Okay, that's a whole different animal, and that gets involved with service agreements. Again, revenue. Again, how do you find out what your parts profits are? That they're really your issues, but then you have service agreements, and some of that profit is hidden in there, but it's actually parts that you provide to your service organization. You may or may not have the same leader for both. But anyway, reserves are important. Impairment reserves, OEMs, what happens when an OEM, a product line is product line is terminated on the production line. What happens a lot of times is that the production guys just dump a whole bunch of inventory in your laps, and you end up eating some of that down the road, where they ship you 50 pieces and you have an annual demand of 1 or 2. The auditors will have to reserve that. It hits your P&L, but in fact, that it's really manufacturing that should have been hit with that impairment. And it sometimes they are. Material is transferred. It is transferred over in a net value. Okay, next. Okay, a return on investment is interesting. Another way of looking besides profitability is what your return on investment is in regards to your profits generated from your assets. All right, so it's it works out pretty well. That's why when you really look at return on investment of parts, it's not always that great. It really, your typical parts organization has, on the OEM side, with multiple locations, if you have multiple locations, you may be doing, 1.2, 1.5 turns a year, or even less. I mean, I've been at the one level. It depends again what your locations are, how many locations you have, what your install base is. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. Now, you have a different investment. Now, planned returns has to be calculated differently. So when you have a swap or exchange, item, that's not the same turnover as an item that has no planned return. They're calculated differently. But looking at ROI as part of the overall financial overview of what you present to leadership is I've used it often. It works reasonably well, but it's not employed by a lot of B2B OEMs. Next. Okay, now when you look at revenue, you look at profit. Now you look at how effective you are, because these are all linked together. All right, all your indirect costs drive how effective your aftermarket parts operation is. Okay, record accuracy. I can't tell you how important record accuracy is, especially when you have tens of thousands of parts or more. Now, rule of thumb is, if you look at dollars, aggregate dollars, you should be at the 99.95%, okay, dollar-wise. At the part number record in regards to quantities, you should be minimum part number accuracy for each part number and quantity accuracy. You should be minimum of 98%. If you don't have these type of accuracies, you have a lot of issues in regards to impacting returns from customers, or just fill rates are lousy, which is the next item. Line item fill rates are tied in with your ability to generate, obviously, revenue. But you have line item fill rates, that's one. That's usually, you'd like to have about a 93%. Again, it depends on escalated issues and everything else. Then you have order fill rates, which you're always going to have less than line item fill rate. And then you have medium age of back orders, right? Those are criteria that will drive the effectiveness of your organization. That's a reflection of the effectiveness of your organization. Then you have unplanned returns. And then one of the interesting things is I always include goodwill. So deals with when you tick off a customer and you want to assure that they walk away somewhat happy. So basically, you give them all free freight, or you give them free part, who knows what, right? But you should include it in your overall cost. I've always done that. It's actually a budget line item. So you have discretion when you get involved with escalation. You don't have to grovel to get funding from anywhere. It's part of your budgeting process. So that becomes as important as well. Next. And I think I've talked. Okay, now it's up to Tom now.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Ron. So just to sum everything up, sizing the prize is critical to capturing the shift taking place. In order to be able to truly go after your aftermarket, you need the right people and processes, technology and tools, as well as data in place. In stepping back and looking at where your organization lies within this framework, you can evaluate your level of aftermarket maturity and ability to grow. Organizations are at varying stages of this journey, and within each one of these building blocks, but understanding your install base and potential part sales is a key starting point for enabling your team to be positioned to take advantage of the shift to equipment being in service longer that is taking place. So with that, Aaron, maybe we can take a couple of questions. I know we're a little bit over time here, but I'll turn it over to you for questions here.
Yeah, I have a few questions and we'll try to make up some time. So the first one I see is Ron. Does Ron's 2 to 4% of value of install base spent annually for equipment maintenance include labor and travel, et cetera?
It's actually, it does. The parts run around, it depends, somewhere between 40 and 60%, depends on the organization of that number. So that number is scaled down a little bit. It really depends on, but typically you would include that in service agreement. It depends on the organization, but yes, that's true. Okay, you'd have to take some of that, those percentages out. Absolutely.
Okay. I see another question around Marked Pilot is a company that helps you to determine if your parts pricing is too high, too low, etc. It's a subscription service. Do you think it's worth the money to invest in this? It's not cheap, but the benefits can be huge.
Well, the way I would use that is if you have market, in other words, one of the reasons, okay, you do your analysis, you find out that the market size is much bigger than your current revenue. Okay, so you know you have some issues, all right, and you don't know what it is. So you can use an outfit like Market Pilot. Is you can start doing analysis of specific part numbers that you have in your database that don't seem to have much demand, but would make maybe sense that they should have higher demand, right? And then you can look at the price difference between what you charge. One of the areas that most OEMs really mess up on is for items that they buy from their suppliers for the production line. So they're, you can have an item that's a commercial off-the-shelf item that's used not only on your machines, but a lot of other machines. And you're paying, you get a special discount from the OEM, from the supplier, who in most cases has their own aftermarket business unit. And they sell it for $100, but only for the production line, buying 100 units at a time. All of a sudden, that production is over, and all you have now is aftermarket parts, where you typically might have a demand of 4 or 5 pieces. All of a sudden, you don't get that $100 price anymore. That the price may be $250, right? So that's where Market Pilot can be interesting to start comparing. Especially on key items. So I agree that it's a good tool to use.
And I think we have time for one more question. You said to measure market share, you take what was sold during the average lifespan of the serial number, and then look at 2 to 4% of that, and that would be your estimated spend to expect for parts. But that's not market share, because market share is a percentage of market size. Can you explain this on how you measure market share for parts?
Well, that was market size is what I just explained to you. I just use a number of 2 to 4%. It could be less, it could be 1 to 3%, depending on a bunch of variables. Each sector is different. But so what you sell today is your market share, is your market share. The question is, you have to know what the market size is to know what your market share is. All right, so you have to estimate what your market size is. So the numerator, the numerator is what your sales are. The denominator is what the size is, and that gives you your share. No big deal.
That's the last question. Thank you, Ron and Tom, for taking time to present to us today. As I mentioned, guys, we will send a recording out afterwards to everyone that attend or registered. If you have any questions, you can reach Ron at the email on the screen, ron@G35software.com. Or if you'd like to reach out to Tom, myself, or DJ, someone from Entitle, feel free to email info@entitle.com. And thank you all again for attending today, and hope you have a fantastic evening.